Content warning for medical trauma, death and mortality, illness and injury, trauma, abuse, isolation, ableism, sanism, eugenics, and systemic oppression. Hello, everybody and everyone. I am Cosmo, the Maelstrom Constellation. My pronouns are Fae Femme. I am a white femme with a mostly shaved head, barring a crest of blue-green hair down the middle, wearing a gray tank top, large black headphones, a septum ring, and large black glasses. Today, I want to talk about chronic illness and plurality and the way this can significantly impact how a plurality functions. As a note, plurality is a term I use in place of system. I've had a number of people in the past not like the term system for themselves, and plurality is a term that I haven't encountered anyone having any difficulty with. So, if I do wobble back and forth between the terms, I'm sorry in advance. um, So, one thing that previously made it kind of difficult for me to find community and fit into those spaces was the fact that I and myself live with severe chronic illness and have my whole life. Not every plurality will adapt to that the same way, but I am going to explain some of the ways I have seen pluralities function through that and sort of the ramifications of those differences. First, though, let's talk about why these adaptations are needed to begin with. I try to make sure that I don't come into these things with any assumptions about anyone's level of knowledge or understanding of any of these types of things. So sometimes these are the sorts of things that people won't have thought about as far as why this kind of thing might develop. When you live with chronic illness, you generally have at least periods of unpleasant symptoms, which we call flares. Your headmates might have the option not to experience some of those things by not fronting. Some of your headmates may not be able to functionally front through those symptoms if they haven't built up a tolerance to them. A lot of times, one of the things that we hear with chronic illness is how people feel that they could, quote unquote, never do that, which is referring to living through these symptoms. And the big key is, well, yeah, if all of these things came on suddenly all at once, of course they'd be very hard to get through and hard to get used to, hard to adapt to, which can be part of why some headmates may have trouble if they don't normally experience those symptoms themselves. Chronic illness can require a level of consistent awareness for the sake of, managing the condition day to day and for being able to work with the medical professionals that you encounter. This can be really tricky if you actually have memory gaps, which a lot of folks with difficulties with their memory that also have chronic illness, which is an unfortunate number of us, can kind of attest to how difficult that can make those interactions. Unfortunately, the medical system can still be rather hostile towards plurals, especially if you have other marginalization, such as being assigned female at birth, being transgender, being a person of color, being disabled, etc. This can be especially true depending on geography, as some places are more dangerous for us than others. Medication side effects can also be very disruptive, and new medications require extra vigilance. You have to be kind of paying attention to all the differences in how you're feeling, the interactions that might be happening between medications, side effects, things like that. So these are just some of the reasons that you might end up having to sort of adapt how you function as a plurality. For a long time, Ian thought Ian was a median system because I, in specific, Siren, am always present to some degree. Median was sort of the closest that Ian had come to describing what Mayan experience was like. Ian have done a lot of reflecting on Mayan past experience and ways we navigated the world around us, and realized Ian wasn't really taking Mayan disabilities into account when thinking about that. There's a lot of social impact there, both in plural spaces and with singlets. Because one of the things is it's hard to give headmates much time when you have chronic fatigue or other things that take up a lot of energy and focus. And at least for me, most of my headmates don't have my pain tolerance. I generally live at about 7 out of 10 pain, with the top of that pain scale being pretty intense. And the method of pain management that we have isn't everyone's favorite feeling. So it can be a little bit difficult to thread that needle, so to speak. This is where something called a terminal comes in. The name for this type of headmate came from a conversation with another plurality we're friends with when sort of talking about how we navigate our health and the way that that impacts how we function as a plurality. Essentially, the terminal provides a scaffolding for the rest of the plurality to interact with the outside world without sacrificing consistency of care and awareness, or putting other headmates through symptoms that they can't withstand. It's a delicate balance of allowing partial control. This allows me to do things like make sure a headmate eats and drinks enough, takes the right meds, doesn't put the body through stressors we can't afford, like hurting our joints by hyperextending, and also allows me to do things like answer a doctor's phone call in the midst of whatever it is they're doing. However, doing this takes energy and focus that I don't always have. Being the terminal is a difficult and tiring thing, but it has an important function of the body and the plurality as a whole. Much like any other role, though, a plurality can absolutely change in ways that lower the explicit need for a terminal. Other members of the plurality may start learning how to take part in the care of the body, may start getting used to the symptoms of their health through co-consciousness by doing things like gradually introducing the symptoms or things like that, until they confront enough that the terminal starts to be able to rest. As the terminal in the constellation, I will say this idea is very daunting. It's not easy to relax that way when you've been serving that function for so long. It feels like the risk is so high enough that you wonder if it's even a good idea to try. It's one of those things where it's like you kind of start to feel like it is unfortunate, because in some ways you start to feel like Atlas. Like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, and if you shift slightly, it will all come tumbling down. At least that's how I feel. But I want to try, because I recognize that if I don't let my headmates support me and I burn out as a result, it will have been my own stubbornness that led to whatever the result is on the body, when the one person who's been doing a lot of that care is sort of not able to do so. We have headmates, a family of our own who, just like our external loved ones, can learn how to help us with our health. Chronic illness can be very isolating, but we have people we can't truly be separated from. Not every relationship between headmates is the best, and I fully recognize that, and it's something that I have dealt with a lot over the years. But at the end of the day, you share a body, and it is a body that needs more than a healthy one. Being plural with chronic illness can also make it feel like you are losing what little control you have over your health, and that is a specific challenge for the terminal to sort of grapple with. chronic illness tends to involve a lot of grief and feeling like you don't have control. And a lot of that comes from things like, I had a flare today and there was nothing I could do about it. I don't get to, I can't just freely choose whatever food it is I want to eat because of dietary restrictions. There are a lot of things that I can't do because of my health, things like that. Those are really common things and feelings with chronic illness, among a lot of other things. So we often look for that control in other places and in other ways. But as many of us learn, that can lead to holding on too tight or burning yourself out because you take on the entire weight of your own health. We need our internal support structure just as much as our external one. I think there's something very important on a community level about understanding terminals. I imagine a lot of us feel out of place in a lot of ways because the way we function doesn't always make sense or seem fair if you don't have an understanding of the daily life requirements of a lot of chronic illnesses. It helps a lot if you keep in mind how and why terminals happen and consider it another effect of chronic illness in the world we live in. Many of the things we do to manage our health are a trade-off. Symptoms for side effects, pain and fatigue for necessary tasks, resources for accessibility, and, in many cases, dignity for care. It's important to keep in mind that everybody may make trade-offs that might not seem to you like the quote-unquote right choice, but only they know the exact weights of their circumstances. There are a lot of factors that go into this sort of thing, and making these kinds of decisions, making these kinds of trade-offs, and the compromises that come with living with chronic illness. And the only one who can really make that decision is the person or plurality in question. And there's no real right choice because all of it has to do with compromise. Ian may make a very different decision than another plurality does. Ian also may go about it differently and for different reasons. So to give some idea of what I do as a terminal, I want to describe what that looks like for me internally. In our mindscape, there is a large spiral staircase in the center, and at the top of that is a large window, almost like a portal. Essentially, my headmates come up to the window when they want to engage with the outside world, and they can do that through the window. What they want the body to do, they can do at the window, and it happens through me. I make it happen. That makes it sound a little bit less active than it actually is. I can give them the right amount of sensory feedback, control, and awareness for what they want to do, which also means I can redirect sensations like our chronic pain, keep an eye on our fatigue without my headmates having to try and focus through that, make sure to grab our water when it's been a bit, readjust us if the body is in a position I know will cause issues, things like that. I can do pretty much all of that by feel, so I can hand over a lot of control and privacy while still doing what I need to do, but that also did take a good amount of practice. Sometimes my headmates just want to make a passing comment, so they might just start talking towards the window. And amusingly, this also means that when I am very sleepy, sometimes instead of saying what I'm trying to say, I will say something that is being said somewhere in the mindscape. It has led to some very amusing conversations. But that kind of highlights a little bit of some of the way that the wires can get a little bit crossed when I'm having difficulty, and part of why it can be hard when I'm low on energy and low on focus to do this right. Other terminals may do it differently, but I wanted to talk a bit about what it's like for me so that people have at least one reference point. I think it's kind of important for people to have some reference point so that they can start to sort of look at and think about, you know, how their own plurality functions if they have chronic illness, how other pluralities they've met might function if they have chronic illness, thinking about how to engage with us on a community level, things like that. Just ways of getting the understanding started. Sometimes I don't have the energy to do things partially that way, so it's a lot harder for my headmates to interact directly, and instead it kind of becomes more of like me passing messages along as I'm able. For a really long time, our health wasn't in a place where I would have thought we could work towards me sharing the weight of this with the rest of the constellation. Recently, though, I've had more space and support for that. Part of what has me thinking as much as I am about the need to work on letting my headmates help is I had a particular day not long ago where a trigger hit me hard enough that I was pretty much entirely knocked out of commission. And my headmates all worked together to make sure that things were taken care of, that I was taken care of. It can be a really scary thing to put that trust in others for your care, because it's a trust fall. You have to trust that the net is there when you let yourself drop. And when you live in a world where the systems that are supposed to be that net habitually drop you, and when you live in a world that has a lot of ableism where a lot of the people around you may be prone to also dropping you, it can be kind of terrifying and really hard to trust that the net is there. But it's also really worthwhile to lean on your support network when you need it. Support and community are important for all of us, but they become a lot more vital with disability of any kind. Chronic illness can involve a lot of abuse from the medical system as well as our own caregivers, and we have a higher rate of being victims of domestic abuse. Because it can sometimes feel like it consumes your entire life, it does make sense that terminals would emerge to allow the rest of the plurality to live an inner life that the body can't necessarily facilitate in the external world, or get bits of that external life without having as much of the difficulties. I think that there is, to some degree, a bit of a natural want from the terminal to give that to their headmates, especially in traumagenic systems, and especially when you have things like littles, where you get that sort of feeling of, I can't give myself the quote-unquote normal, quote-unquote healthy life, but I can give that to, for example, a good example is the little in Mayan system, Mayan plurality, lemur. Because, you know, she did have to grow up with this kind of thing, and there's something beautiful feeling in being able to go, no, you don't have to worry about this right now. Just enjoy your cocoa, have your time with your friends, and just be happy. Just be full of joy. But it's a balance. Like other archetypal roles, their necessity over time also very much depends on the plurality itself. One reason I find this so important to discuss is that pluralities with a terminal may find themselves not relating to a lot of experiences other pluralities have, and that can lead to a feeling that a lot of us are pretty familiar with and can relate to, which is sort of that creeping doubt of an imposter syndrome of, am I really plural? I know I find myself in this doubt when I have long stretches of flares and stress, because it becomes hard to do anything more than make sure that the body survives to the next day. And that very much means I generally can't do more as far as the social side of things. A lot of the times I can't even socialize myself, let alone be able to facilitate that for my headmates. And because of how it looks and works for me and in specific, it can also be hard for me to even be very aware of our inner world, because it takes so much focus just to do the basics. It can be a really lonely time because of that. And I also often struggle with the guilt of knowing my and loved ones miss my headmates too. Those reminders are important for us, though, because it speaks to the fact that we are seen enough now to be missed. That others have built those relationships with not just me, but also my headmates. And there's something about that that can be very heartening, because when you feel like you're not doing enough for your headmates to allow them the space to be and to live their own lives as well, that feeling of, no, there are relationships that they have that are strong enough that they are actively missed, can be very helpful in sort of abating that. Hope and joy can sometimes be difficult to hold on to with chronic illness, especially when you find yourself at community intersections that radically change your experience and perspective. There's a lot we can learn together, and in a mass disabling event that has left millions with chronic fatigue and many other complications that impact how a plurality can function, it's more important than ever for us to remember that all of us experience and navigate the world differently. Some pluralities now find themselves trying to adapt to circumstances like mine, and understanding this idea, understanding terminals and how pluralities adapt to chronic illness, even if it's not this way, it's really important, and it allows us to strengthen our community and be able to better guide and support each other, which I think, especially when it comes to plurality, is crucial. Because plurality can be a beautiful thing, but also very hard to navigate in a world built for singlets. We've built beautiful community worldwide across such a wide variety of experiences, and that is not an easy thing to do. It is not an easy thing to do, especially with a group that has so much stigma behind it, that has so much misunderstanding from the majority, and adding the layers of chronic illness onto that can be further difficult, because chronic illness also has a lot of stigma to it and a lot of misunderstanding to it, and it sort of compounds things a lot. So my hope is that through this and through me talking about these adaptations, these experiences, these considerations, the way that things change when you add in these layers, my hope is that this gives a starting point for some of you out there, and also for those who may function similarly to me, and I hope that this gives you the sense of having been seen, because that is always the base goal that I have when I do things like this, is for people who resonate with these experiences to feel seen, because I know how hard it can be to feel seen with this sort of thing. So, thank you all for listening and for adding another perspective to your understanding of plurality. It's a big, beautiful, diverse thing. And I like to think about it kind of like the varieties of flowers that exist. All of them, there may be a lot that look similar. There's some basic structures that are somewhat consistent across different types, but they're all beautiful in their own ways, and they all adapt to things differently. And their environments make a big difference. So I like helping to make sure that every flower has the right environment to grow. Thank you so much.